Andrew from Sachs, and welcome to video number 3 in our 7-video sequence on performance development, including 360-degree feedback. So what we've covered so far in this sequence is why we do performance development, and we also looked at why most performance development doesn't work. So now we're transitioning into the question of what does work in performance development, and we're going to be giving you some really specific suggestions. But what we'll do in this video is give you some high-level concepts that you should factor into your performance development system if you want it to work well. So a good method has two really important characteristics. Firstly, it gets done. Now, anybody who's ever built performance development systems knows that one of the biggest issues that you have is compliance, where you roll it out and most people just don't do it, or maybe you get 60 or 70% take up. A good performance development system should get done. And the second characteristic is that it should change behavior. I mean, why are we doing this? If it doesn't change people's behaviors, then it's by definition a failure. So this is where psychology comes in, because what changes behavior is psychological characteristics. So let's look at these two characteristics and make some suggestions about the components that a good performance development system should have so that it will work, so that it will get done by people and that it will change behavior. Point number one is the question of whether it is supported by your local leaders and whether it gives people what they want. Many performance development systems don't give people what they want. And what we mean by what they want, what does the leader want and what does the staff member want? Now, if local leaders model these behaviors, then it will get done. If people put an emphasis on the value of it, if people make sure that it's going to contribute to the success of the business, not to some abstraction like corporate culture, then they'll be much more likely to do it and see value in the entire exercise. So the ideal method, firstly, as simple and short as possible. Think of the performance development system that you're considering building. Take out absolutely everything that's not crucial. Most performance development systems are too long and too complicated. That's point number one. Point number two is that it should be free form. What I mean by free form is that the best performance development systems have space to write goals at the start of a cycle and a place to evaluate whether those goals have been achieved at the end of a cycle, and maybe with a mid-cycle review. So the concept is that you make these extremely free form, and the goals should be conversations between the leader and staff member. Now, when you introduce this kind of process, you will get pushback from leaders because they say, well, hang on, I actually have to think about this. But the point is, that's the entire reason you do it. Because if the leader has a genuine conversation with a staff member about what do we want you to achieve, then it's far more likely that it's going to give both parties what they want. And also, it's simpler to hold people accountable rather than having a whole bunch of ratings that have nothing to do with them. So that leads on perfectly to point number 3, an almost complete absence of corporate guff. Ratings, competencies, all that stuff. Look, we know that people love to put that stuff in. People have competency frameworks and they think, oh, well, I've got to populate the performance development process with the competency framework. Adds nothing. Make it as simple as possible. Set goals and assess whether those goals have been achieved. Now, in later videos, we'll show you that the goals don't actually have to be just simply work achievement goals. They can be learning and development goals. They can be career progression goals. They can be goals associated with professional behaviors. So not just did I make budget, but you can make goals which are effective in saying, okay, here are the behaviors that we want to see. Obviously not too many of them, and we'll tell you how many in subsequent videos, but short number of goals, really clear, and space to evaluate whether those goals have been achieved. That's the best performance development system. It's goal-based, and what you'll also need is that if you're going to adopt this process, then you may need strong and effective goal training, where leaders are trained in how to write goals, and actually so are staff. That's where it works best. Most performance development systems, when they're introduced, are not supported by satisfactory training. Yes, people will be told about, okay, these are the forms and here's how you fill it in and that sort of stuff. But effective performance development relies on two really important skill sets. Firstly, goal setting. And goal setting should be a skill that's possessed by both the leader and the staff member. And second, performance conversations. In subsequent videos, we'll talk more about the skills associated with both of those areas. But if you've got that kind of a framework and you've got the skills necessary to undertake it, then you've got a half a chance of making your performance development system work well. Also, Good performance development should have consequences. When you hear the word consequences, you start to think of negatives like people getting fired and those sorts of things. Well, consequences don't have to be negative. This person gets promoted because they've done well in their goal achievement in the performance development system. This person, yes, this person had to be taken aside and have conversations about, we need you to behave in a different way, or we need to achieve goals in a different way. The consequences can be positive and negative, but if you want the performance development to work, it has to have teeth. Teeth in the positive sense about this is how you get promoted, this is how you get rewarded, this is how you get your work varied to take on more challenging and interesting tasks, but also consequences for redirection. Okay, you're not good at this, so we'll skill you up to be able to do this. Your behaviours are not meeting the standards in this area, so we will work with you to help you to achieve those behaviours. Now, of course, if the remediation is not there, we all know sadly there are times when an organisation and a person need to part company, but consequences are really important to make your performance development process work. What this leads to is a conceptual model of employee review and development. And the idea is that at the start of a cycle, you will have a goal and objective setting process. At the middle of a cycle, you have a mid-cycle review. And at the end, you'll have a formal performance conversation to identify whether the goals set at the start have been achieved or not. So the aim is to develop a performance culture. And the reason that good performance development systems and processes work is that they can encourage these informal performance conversations. The I will catch you doing something right conversation. Hey, Mary Smith, you wrote a great report. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Hey, Bill Blogs, next time you talk to the customer, I would like you to do this in a slightly different way. They're informal performance conversations. Now, we'll show you down the track that those informal performance conversations are, not surprisingly, far more important than the formal performance conversations. And one of the main reasons is that they can happen anytime. I mean, if you've got a formal performance development process, I know almost no organisation that does that more than quarterly. And the quarterly time frame, in other words, every 3 months we have a formal performance conversation reviewing the goals that were set at the start of the cycle. And also, of course, I should mention that the goals that are set at the start of the cycle don't have to be locked in concrete for the entire year. They can be morphed and changed because the business changes its objectives or because the world changes. The more flexible and dynamic the system is, again, that makes it more likely that it will give people what they want. So there's some concepts about what works. Clear as possible, simple as possible, based on goal and goal achievement, and also built on good performance conversations. We're going to go in the next video into a little bit more detail about what kinds of goals work. There's a body of psychological research called goal theory, and it's based on the idea that certain goals can change behaviours more effectively. Click on the link near this video to join us for the next in this sequence.